Hello and welcome to the latest episode of the High Growth Leadership Podcast with me, David Blair.
And me, Simon West.
So we had a fantastic conversation today with Liam White, who is the CEO of Dr. Will's, and we have got some of the Dr. Will's products here in front of us today. So Dr. Will's are at the very forefront of the healthy eating revolution in the UK, specifically within condiments. So they are a challenger brand, and it's fair to say they are still at the earlier stage of their growth journey.
Yeah, but even so, relatively early in, but they have now found themselves listed by Tesco, lots of other leading UK retailers. So from a relatively recent start, they've made phenomenal progress. Very wide-ranging conversation with Liam. He was very open and shared lots of information about his decision-making around leaving a successful corporate career in investment banking to get involved in a startup and co-found a business with a couple of guys he'd never met before.
Yeah. So we spent a lot of the discussion talking about what made him make that decision to jump from his successful corporate career and take on such a monumental challenge. So the context being they had to create the product. They knew going into it that the distribution channels was going to be through the key grocers, which I think most people appreciate is a very difficult thing to do. And they were going up against the might of Heinz and Hellmann's. We've got close to infinite marketing budget, and they were going at this on a relative shoestring.
Yeah, and it says that they've been really, really savvy with the way they've used social media. They've achieved a great amount of brand awareness. I think lots to take away for businesses in this market, but others as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And then Liam's kind of love and passion for all things food, and particularly all things healthy food, is it's just a real pleasure to witness and be around. So we hope you enjoy it as much as we did. So hello and welcome, and thank you for joining us, Liam, on our High Growth Leadership Podcast. Fantastic to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for travelling as well. You've come from London today, so much appreciated.
No problem.
Toastless and everything.
I know, yeah.
I know, honestly, I checked the weather this morning. I thought maybe this is the first day I'm going to get away without a jacket. And then I thought, yeah, but when I look at Newcastle, I'm going to come unstuck, but it was fine.
Yeah, I've just been for a stroll and a coffee, and it's glorious sunshine.
Lovely,
and showing Newcastle in its very best light. So we're here today to hopefully talk about your business, but also yourself and what makes you tick and how you have successfully grown a business to date and plan to keep doing so. Yep. But you can explain Dr. Will's and the backstory to that far better than Simon and I. So do you want to just jump in and tell us a little about the business?
Yeah, definitely. So we started Dr. Will's back in 2017, so we've been going a little while now. Founded by myself, Will, who is a medical doctor, hence the name of the brand, and then Josh, so three founders. None of us knew each other. So Will and Josh met in the gym. Josh was the only person that Will knew who made his own living, wasn't a doctor, accountant, working for somebody else. And Will had the idea when his mum, who's a nursery school teacher, was seeing parents trying to get their kids to eat their carrots, broccoli, vegetables, and the only way they could get them to do it was covering it in, sugary ketchup, barbecue sauce, that kind of thing. She was then saying to Will, isn't there something better for these kids out there? Will went away, had a look, couldn't find anything. And then we got started from there. So Will and Josh met in the gym. I met Will when I was doing investment banking and wanted to do anything other than that. I enjoyed my time there, but I knew pretty quickly I wasn't going to be like a career investment banker. Met Will through this process to find something to do. Joined him as a co-founder, and then the three of us sort of built the business from there. Originally started out with ketchup. We had a beetroot ketchup as well in the early days, and a barbecue sauce. Since expanded our range into mayonnaise, hot sauce, and then salad dressings, which I think will be out by the time you see this podcast.
Fantastic.
Which we can talk about. So expanded across all of sauces, and our whole philosophy is to make sauces that taste great, but without but that are better for you at the same time. So without adding sugar, we use dates instead and less of them. And we use the best quality ingredients, natural ingredients we can find. And then we built the business from very much market stall. So the Bridge Market in Jesmond was the first place we ever sold a product.
Some Northeast heritage.
Yeah, so the business actually started in Newcastle. So Will and Josh met here. In the gym here. They've always been Newcastle based and still are. I'm in London, so it's kind of a hybrid London-Newcastle thing going on. Still registered in the high street in Gosforth.
Fantastic.
So yeah, we're a bit of a hybrid of the two. Yeah, built this from very much market stall quite literally, making it in Josh's restaurant kitchen in the early days, selling to Fenwick in Newcastle was kind of our first sort of proper, kind of, I guess, premium store, and then through to kind of Selfridges, Harvey Nicks, and then it was kind of Ocado, and then 2020 was a bit of a step change. So we launched into Tesco and Waitrose, and then we've been scaling in retail, amongst other things, for the last few years.
Okay, cool. And just to go back a little bit, you sort of, the two guys had met each other and then you met them as well. Just sort of just unpick that a little bit. How did you meet them, and then how did you all decide that working together on this was the right thing to do?
Yeah, so none of us knew each other, weren't even friends before. So Will and Josh, met doing a gym class, doing CrossFit gym classes up here. And then they figured out, right, we can do a bit of sales and marketing, but we need somebody who can help with like the business, operations, finance side of things. That's where the gap is. They advertised for a job to do like operations. I got talking to Will through that. I remember meeting him. We had this co-working space in Vauxhall, and it was actually a really nice co-working space, but it was on this council estate in Vauxhall, and it's pretty shady. And I had to be in the office about 8:45, normally 9:00 for work. So I remember turning up in a suit about 7:30 in the morning. So I get out with Will before I went to JP Morgan and thinking, what am I doing here? I was the only guy in a suit in this kind of sketchy place. And there was this big old warehouse with this heavy steel door. And I was thinking, maybe I've made a terrible decision here. Anyway, so I met Will, and then I think quite quickly in that process, they realised that actually we sort of need a business partner here. Josh was working, he's a serial entrepreneur, had other businesses. Will was taking a break from being a doctor and was doing a PhD. So he had some time to spend on the business, but not full time. And my intention was to to go all in on something. So realized kind of pretty soon after that point that they needed a business partner. I wanted to either start something or join something sort of from the ground up.
So you'd made that decision to do something, and then you found Dr. Wills rather than you weren't merrily going along the investment banker route.
No, I think I went into investment banking thinking I'll learn as much as I possibly can in the first few years, and I was pragmatic about how long I'd be there. The reality was I worked extremely hard. The team I was in were a fantastic group of people, and like that's when people say what do you miss about investment banking, it's probably the people there. They were fantastic. So you had this great like collegiate atmosphere. Okay. We got fantastic people at Dr. Wills as well. I think like the thing that made banking bearable was you had all of these people working late at night together. Come to midnight, order a pizza, and keep going, and all that kind of stuff. So there was a great kind of atmosphere, but it was brutal. Like the work life, our team was really understaffed, so it was kind of 1, 2, 3 a.m. most nights. Occasionally not going home before the morning, once or twice. Like really, really like brutal work life. And I kind of realized that I can do this for a bit, but I'm not. I've always been health conscious. Like was an athlete as a junior and all that kind of stuff. And I was like, okay, this is the first time I'm starting to get out of shape in my life, and bags under the eyes, and it just wasn't. It wasn't a long term thing for me.
And when you think back to those early conversations, what was it that sort of, if you've made the decision that you wanted to try something very different to that, how do you then, that's great, but then how do you go and create confidence that these two human beings out of everybody on planet Earth are the two people that you want to sort of get into business bed with? Yeah,
I mean, I think there was definitely, and I'd say some, but it's probably a lot of naivety, and I'm quite lucky that I probably was as naive as I was, because I think there's a couple of things. Getting into business with two guys you never met before, and then taking on Heinz and Unilever, Hellmann's, which are two of the biggest food and drink businesses in the world. So I think if I'd thought really deeply about those things, I'd probably, I might not have taken the risk. So I'm grateful that I didn't. But I think my overriding thought then was, at the time I think I was 25 at the time. And I was like, look, I can do this for 2 years. And if I completely screw it up, I'll be 27 and I'll go back into investment banking or consulting or something like that. And like, what's the worst that's going to happen? And if I don't do this now, I'll be, who knows where you'll be, but you might have a house, kids, family, all this kind of stuff before you blink your eyes and you get there. And then it's going to be a lot harder to do something like this. So at least if I try, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't. But what do I really have to lose? I'm lucky that I had, family in London, all that kind of stuff that would, I could go back there if it all went terribly wrong. Yeah. So
how far the business got at that point when you made the decision, taking to what, going over the timeline you covered at the start there, it wasn't in any stores yet?
No, we had a product. We didn't have any manufacturing. So we had we had a sort of a loose relationship with a manufacturer that could make some product for us, but we didn't have any sort of concrete manufacturing. We had some prototype product that we made ourselves in the kitchen, and we were in the process of, we were working with some consultants at the time to help us sort of turn it into a sort of a factory, production ready recipe. And then we had a couple of independent stockists. So we didn't have any, certainly weren't any supermarkets, didn't have any sort of like any multiple retailers or anything like that. We just had a handful of stockists, a little bit of stock, and a quarter of a factory, I'd say. So yeah, not very much. I think we did 38k of turnover that year that I joined halfway through. And then we sort of put our foot on the gas from there.
I'm trying to imagine that through the prism of the eyes of your JB Morgan colleagues and your manager to say, I'm leaving to go and join two guys in Newcastle to start to join the business.
Well, they were remarkably supportive. A couple of them invested in the business and have been great since. And I hope, I hope that they'll be rewarded for that decision at some point, because it'd be nice for them to have, backed me at the point when I needed them to. And interestingly, I went in with my boss, who was fantastic, and I sat down with him, and I was so nervous, like going in. I knew I was there to resign. I got in, I was first at the desk. I basically sat there from about 8:30, just waiting. And all I could think about was this conversation that I'd rehearsed within an inch of my life. And I walked in and told him, and he was like, he looked at me and he said, I'm not going to try and convince you to stay, because I can see that you're, it was so off the wall what I was going to do. And I was clearly excited about it, and also pretty drained from the kind of the couple of years that I'd spent just, working myself into the ground, that he knew that there was no point in trying to convince me, and just wish me luck. And it's been really helpful, as like kind of my more direct manager there, who was also really supportive about it, still in touch, so they were great about it.
Oh, fantastic. And then you touched on this before, but taking on the might of the established brands in that space, which we don't need to name check them, but they're formidable. Can you remember the three of you discussing that and saying, is this doable? Or were you so, mentioned naive before, were you so enthused by the product and you'd recognize, a very real need to have a healthier alternative? Were you just, all guns blazing, jump in? Or were you talking about, we're taking on a real giant here?
A bit of both. So we were very blinkered, I think, in the early days. We had a business plan and we knew the size of the market, and we knew kind of what we needed to do in order to build a decent business. So we were thinking about it in that context, but we were also just stuck in the details of trying to get a product that tasted good, worked, did all the things we thought it needed to do in order for someone to pick it up and then hopefully buy it again if they liked it. So we were quite blinkered. We also looked across the pond to the US, which is often a good indicator of trends to come. The US food scene is probably 3, 4, 5 years ahead of the UK food scene quite often. It's interesting in the US because you have like the best and the worst, I often say, because if you go to a Whole Foods or a premium retailer in the US, it's fantastic, and you can get the healthiest, most interesting food. They have a trade show called Expo West, which is on the West Coast, and some of the most innovative food is out there. Lots of people from the UK will go out there to sort of see the trends, but you also have terrible, horrible processed stuff. The regulations are a lot looser than they are in Europe, so you can get all sorts of dyes and colors and additives that you can't use in Europe. So you have the best and the worst food over there. But on the innovative end is a great place to look. So we saw a couple of businesses doing interesting things in the condiment space, and we also saw that if you looked in the store, there was so much more space. So there was regional barbecue sauces, hot sauces made with all sorts of different flavor combinations. Mayonnaise, there was avocado oil mayonnaise, which is a big product for us now, that we saw over in the US, and that became a thing. So there's lots of things that were further ahead and gave us confidence, seeing a few businesses do a really good job and become, I wouldn't say they'd taken a hugely meaningful share out of Heinz, but they'd done a really good job. They've got mass distribution, and a couple of them been acquired as well, which made you think, okay, they've made decent businesses out of them, so it must be doable.
And were you able to discern from those challenger brands that had grown what had enabled them to be successful in a very large, very competitive market?
Some of it. So I think I can figure it out now. I probably didn't have the knowledge of the category to be able to do it then, but I think it was a combination of a few things. So some of them had a hero product. So they had a certain product that had really driven the whole business. And then there was some sort of clever channel strategy and things like that. So one of the businesses did a sort of really clever thing where they got a Whole Foods listing, and then they worked really hard to get into all the restaurants in the same block. So they'd try and saturate all those Whole Foods stores with, with the restaurants nearby would also have the product. So people would go to the restaurant, try this, think this is great. On their way back, go to the grocery shop and then think, oh, that's the ketchup I just had in the restaurant. Fantastic. So we saw this kind of, retail and sort of food service combination strategy working. Saw some of the some brands doing a really good job of product, so just launching innovative things, different flavors, things like the avocado oil, for example. We saw those things and we tried to sort of piece together what had worked, but you never know because you can never see enough behind the scenes, but you can get a sense of some of the things that do work. We looked at kind of, and we looked outside our category as well. So when we were in the UK, we were looking at, while no one was doing anything in condiments, there was huge innovation and health innovation in other sectors. So I think you said you're having a pack of Grays on the way here. They were one that we looked at. Grays nuts. People were, previously had crisps and chocolate for snacks. Then they were having popcorn, Grays nuts, all that kind of stuff. Protein bars, Grenade. So people were massively moving away from those. Other areas, seeing like the alcohol-free movement was starting. So all of that kind of stuff. Fever Tree, less of a kind of health play, more of a quality play, but people getting really focused on, actually, that's 75% of my drink, so let's make it the best.
And being willing to move away from an established brand as well,
and pay more. So we saw all this stuff and we thought, actually, there's a gap there, and people are demonstrating that behavior in other categories, and it's happening in the US. If you sort of triangulate those things and try to figure out what's working for some other brands, then maybe we've got a shot at something here.
Doesn't sound quite as crazy.
It starts to sound less crazy. It's like 9 out of 10 crazy rather than 10 out of 10 crazy.
Fantastic. And then, so that bet on customers willing to diversify their shopping habits and pay more, and also a bet on health. Kind of 7 years on, have those trends developed as you expected them to?
Yeah, I'd say they have. I think it's a lot easier, obviously, to look back in hindsight. I think we were early on the health thing in condiments, for sure. So I think we've seen hugely in the last, I'd say, 18 months and even the last year, the health landscape in the UK has just changed entirely. I think there were quite specific health focuses. So I think in the very early days when we started, there was a kind of like a low-calorie, clean eating sort of movement, and a lot of people were eating quite processed foods, but high protein, low sugar, that kind of thing. We were always trying to do natural ingredients and then sensible, we use dates and we use less of them. So you have like a barbecue sauce might have 50% sugar in it sometimes. We have 15 broadly, so about 2/3 less, but it all comes from dates, from tomatoes, so it's from natural sources. And that was quite a hard thing to put into words at the time, but you're seeing it now. I think people have moved away from these kind of distinct health messages, low sugar, low calorie, high protein, and then you've got this kind of ultra processed food movements where people are like, which kind of wraps up everything, where it's like, let's eat real natural foods, and sort of by default you then end up eating stuff that is low in sugar naturally, because you're not adding all this extra stuff. So I think it's happened probably slower than we thought. I think we're ahead of the game there, but then everything's moved really quickly in the last sort of 12, 18 months, and we've seen a huge increase in kind of our rate of sale. We've seen a big step change. It was building anyway, but it's really stepped up as a result of some of this, as well as some of the things that we're doing as well. You can never quite tell in retail, but there's definitely been a huge tailwind lately on health.
And that sort of, I guess, sort of ties into all sorts of sort of socio-economic factors as well. But can you sort of put a pinpoint on, or sort of pinpoint any of the reasons why 12, 18 months ago, all of a sudden it felt like you did experience those tailwinds?
Yeah, I think there was so macro health trends is a big thing. More people, I think post-COVID, a lot of people sort of had big revelations around health and well-being, realized that, okay, now because you weren't doing very many things, you could almost A/B test, and you had people who were pretty much sitting in their home, and then they went outside, walked around the block. Oh, I feel better. And people had this like direct correlation between like exercise, eating well makes me feel better. So I think that sort of sparked things. And then you've just seen I think we owe a lot to Ultra Processed People, the book that a lot of people have read. Lots of people read that. And I think even healthy people that I talk to, athletes I talk to, were like, oh yeah, it's going back to eating butter and things like that, and thinking like, actually, that's good for me rather than the low-fat margarine. And I'm thinking in my head, how did you not know that? You should know that, like, you know, a single ingredient food is going to be better for you than the one that has 20 ingredients and all sorts of agents to make it the certain texture and things. But people are sort of realizing that, yeah, okay, macros in isolation aren't the answer, but actually quality food is. So I think there's something there. There's also the last couple of years, last 3 years have been really tough in the UK economically. And we've seen like the data is now saying, you know, while we're not in a fantastic place, absolutely, more people are moving away from struggling and into coping. And then those who are in coping are into a better place as well. So we're definitely seeing people starting to get into a better place financially, having sort of like seen out a couple of rough years, really high inflation coming down. So I think it's a combination of different things, but those two together really help. But we're just seeing normal people, you know, not health nuts or athletes walking down the aisle scanning barcodes and turning products around in a way that they weren't previously. That was very much only the, you know, the 10% of really healthy people. Now it's, you know, normal people on their Euchre app or apps like this looking at it thinking, oh yeah, okay, that's got this and this in it. I'll pick it up, or I won't pick it up.
Phenomenal. And so that decision again to launch, and I know we've dwelt on this, but I think it's worth doing. So if I'd been sat in your shoes, things that would have been potentially terrifying and putting me off. We've already mentioned you didn't know your business partners.
Yep.
Simon and I didn't actually know each other when we went into business. Okay. Yes, that's something we have in common. The size of the competitors.
Yep.
Kind of betting on new health trends, but then there's also which you haven't talked about yet, but it'll be fascinating to hear about a brand, you know, making noise in such a competitive space, difficult, and then the routes to market. So, you know, ultimately the scale, got to get through the grocers, which you were doing very successfully. I think when you rewind back to when you were sitting there, to a lot of businesses who might have a great idea for a retail product, the might of the grocers and the complexity of them and finding a way to navigate through that is incredibly daunting. So how did you guys feel about it, first of all, and how did you actually find a way through that?
Yeah. So the grocery is really challenging. So I think if you look at food and drink is tough anyway, because you have a physical product rather than, you know, software business or something like that, where you don't have a physical product. Working capital challenges, you know, scaling is never straightforward because you have to have the thing to sell, and then when you're growing fast, that's, you know, easier said than done.
Well, and the ketchup's got a shelf life as well. Your sort of software product's going to last a little bit longer than 4 weeks after it's been in the fridge.
You'd hope so. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you have all these challenges, and then the grocery, like the complexity of the grocery market adds on top of that. I think it took us a long time to get into grocery. So we started off the fairly well-trodden path.
Did you always want to? Because I remember sort of dealing with other sort of challenger brands and actually making a conscious decision that they didn't want to, and actually they didn't think the price of the terms that they would have to sort of adhere to, the sort of the additional stresses was actually worth it, and they were going to sort of try and seek their fame and fortune away from the sort of big four as it is.
Yeah, we always did. I think we always thought that if we have a product that's healthier, tastes great and is healthier and does some good, we can do that at a much larger scale if we work with the retailers. And while it's really, really difficult to get in there and it's difficult to stay in there, if you can make it work, you can build a really valuable business. And I think it's tricky to do that outside of the retailers. It's possible, absolutely. So we still absolutely sell to farm shops. We work with a few wholesalers. That means that we can sell to farm shops, delis, independents, and we love doing that. But we always realized that being in retail was important, but challenging. I think we met Tesco in 2017 for the first time. We launched 3 years later, so 3 years and that was kind of 3 years of conversations. It wasn't like they said no, come back in 3 years. It was ongoing conversations. Maybe we're going to launch, maybe we're not, and then eventually we got it over the line. So yeah, like 3 years of working on it. They kind of came like buses weirdly. Like post-COVID was a nightmare for us. So we were, in the early days, we were selling to lots of independents, and we were building that up, and then premium grocers, so the likes of Selfridges, Harvey Nicks, and then we were doing some food service stuff. So we were selling to some cafes, restaurants, brunch spots, that kind of thing. We still do a bit of that, a smaller part of our business now. Then COVID hit. we had a wholesaler that we worked with to do all the food service stuff. They cancelled their only outstanding order, so we're like, right, okay. And then we didn't see any orders for a few months from that side of the business. We had Ocado at that point, so we had some online retail. We had Amazon, we had our website, so we pushed that side of the business, but we had nothing on food service. And then through that period, it was initially horrendous because we lost all our food service, we lost all our all our retail really, and then after a really, really rocky, probably the rockiest 6 months we ever had, we then launched into Waitrose and Tesco at the same time. So weirdly, I don't know what it was about that period, but we managed to break through, having kind of had the conversations. We did a lot of work on the brand, so everything has to line up to get into retail. So you need to have the product needs to be great, the brand needs to be great. And they want some data as well. And that's one of the challenges, is no one wants to be first. But if you can show that it's working in a Selfridges, then you might get a Waitrose. And if you can show it's working in a Waitrose, you might get a Tesco. So it's kind of stepping stones. But yeah, it's tricky to work with the retailers in terms of like big businesses to work with. You've got to get things right, but they're also fantastic to work with in terms of great volumes, and they're very good partners. Like if you have a good relationship with them, it's how you reach all of the country and how you can really build a business at scale. And yeah, we work really closely with them.
And we've touched on sort of consumer awareness and consumer habits changing around healthier eating and consuming more natural foods. The big retailers have businesses to run, high headcount. They've got to be invested in evolving their categories to incorporate more healthier options.
Yeah.
How have you observed their attitudes to products like yours evolving in the time that you've been dealing with them?
Yeah, it's definitely changed. I think in the early days we were saying health is important in condiments, and we've got some some puzzled looking faces, I'd say, and that's definitely evolved over time. I think we're probably still ahead and pushing more, and there's always challenges. For example, when they're looking at when they're working out how to highlight health products, they'll still look kind of very much at the traffic lights, whereas we're trying to say look at the traffic lights, but also can we look at ingredient quality, because that's kind of how look at level of processing and those kind of next things. So there's and obviously the retailers are huge businesses, so it's tricky for them to evolve how they categorize products and all of that sort of stuff. So we're trying to push that whole thing forward, but in general they're really open to it. They have targets around health. I think Tesco have a stated, we want to sell X number of healthy products by their health score by a certain year. So they have a stated objective of selling more healthy products. And I think you can see in the data that's where the consumer's headed. So you sort of know over time people are going to buy less sugary, unhealthy products made with unhealthy ingredients. So yes, it might take some time and you might not see an immediate payoff, but if you're not investing in those products and at least giving them some space with a view to growing over time, you're going to get found out, because the consumer is changing, and we can see it in our sales, in the broader sales data out there, and the retailers do know that, and they're pushing towards it. And they also, I think they recognize that they have a big say in the health of the nation as well, and there's government objectives. They work quite closely with the retailers because nearly 30% of the food is bought at Tesco. If you take the big four, that's most of the food that is bought in the UK. So they need to work closely with the government to have a healthy nation, because that's what drives productivity and bigger picture stuff.
Which is a difficult thorny issue. We can all remember the kind of Jamie Oliver moves to make school meals healthier, and the opposition that was met with. So not an easy area.
No.
And so you mentioned the kind of breakthrough moments when you got into those big retailers. I can imagine that was fantastic. Once you're in, what does that look like then in terms of getting more shelf space and improving volumes with them? What are they like as a partner for that?
Yeah, it gets a lot harder once you get in. That's the reality of it. So getting in is tricky, but like remaining in and growing is the hard part, because then you've already got the job starts. You have to move the products off the shelf. It's a really collaborative relationship, so you have to work with them. We stay really on top of the data, look at what's working, figure out if you need to run a promotion, what kind of promotion, lots of sort of manual stuff, looking down the aisle and seeing how the products are merchandised. Are they in the right place? Is it clear to the consumer? So you have to, it's a very kind of collaborative thing where you're working out what's working for you and therefore what's working for the retailer. And then you're looking at, your sales versus the category and working out, over time, you can then push for more distribution, more products if things are working. But the data.
But you're pushing for that rather than them coming to you for that. That's the way the relationship works.
Normally the brand will be pushing, but you'll get more, when the data is good, it's an open door. When the data is not good, it's very tricky. So that evolves over time. I think the tricky thing with a retail business versus, if you have an e-com online direct consumer business, your sales can be quite linear in terms of growth because you can control the levers, how much you spend on advertising. Whereas with retail, you kind of you sell like this, and then you get a jump where they say, right, okay, you've hit a certain level of sales, now let's give you some more stores, or those products are doing really well, let's launch a couple more. So that's, and it takes some time to get that stuff right. And we're seeing that at the moment, which is great, but you have to really work hard and make sure that every product you have in retail is pulling its weight, because there's a finite amount of space, and the retailer has to maximize growth, sales, all of those kind of key metrics from a quite a small amount of space, often in a lot of the stores.
Does that put a lot of pressure on new product launches for you when you're going into the new stores?
Yeah, definitely, because it needs to work. And in those early, those crucial kind of first couple of months are really crucial. Looking at because it takes a while. Retail isn't as straightforward as, you have a launch date. We can see our availability on that launch date might not be anywhere near 100% because the products are still rolling into store. You want to go in and check and make sure that everything's arriving. So we'll spot check stores, make sure that everything's landed in the place that it should be in, because sometimes things don't quite work out. Because these are enormous businesses going into, product might be going into 300, 400, 500 stores across the UK. They all have different layouts. So you've got different store types, from the kind of, the express to the superstores to the metros, or locals if you've got Sainsbury's. And then even the same store type have different amounts of space. And it's like, some stores have like 7 or 8 or 9 different sort of configurations of store, and they're all going to be slightly different. So there's tons of complexities in how it works, and you have to make sure that you're on top of everything. And
can you influence that? Can you provide a view that you think that your product sells best when it's in this configuration? Will they listen to that, or is it kind of you can observe, but you're pretty powerless to influence it?
Yeah, no, they do, and as you become a bigger part of their business as well, they'll spend more time with you, and you can look at these things, but they will absolutely look at configurations and make sure that things are right. And you often have challenges, like, for example, a mayo could be, you have like a plain mayo and a flavored mayo. Where would avocado oil mayo fit? Because it's not a flavor, it's a different type of oil. So should it be in mayo? There's decisions like that, and we'll be involved in the decision about where it should sit. And then you can also think about things like, sometimes brands want a brand block where they have a couple of products of the same brand that sit next to each other, so it looks really strong on shelf, but you might have a challenge in that if that's not the way the consumer shops, so you're putting things slightly out of position, it's very unlikely that a consumer walks down the aisle saying, I want to buy Dr. Will's. They're saying, I want to buy hot sauce, or mayo, and Dr. Will's looks good, or mayo, and that's how they shop. So you have to sort of think about the shopper and not necessarily what you think in your head is going to be great for your brand.
And just for people who might be a little bit less familiar with the food industry, I mean, you talked about, as you make progress with these enormous customers, going from not being listed to being in several hundred stores, that creates a very different demand from a manufacturing and operational point of view. So how much lead time do you get in terms of understanding how much stock these enormous customers need, and then how do you manage how much manufacturing capacity you've got at any one time? Because presumably you don't want to overinvest in manufacturing capacity before you've got the orders, but then you've got the orders, you need the manufacturing capacity. How do you sort of square that circle? Yeah,
it's a massive juggling act, and the whole food and drink game is kind of a chicken and egg thing, because it's like you need, when you find a manufacturing partner in the early days, they want you to come with some volume, but you also need the manufacturing partner in order to drive some volume, and then you need the retailers. So everything has to line up. You generally get a good amount of notice, so you'll be working a few months ahead, and then what you should be doing is kind of keeping all your partners apprised. So your manufacturing partners, your packaging partners, making sure you're speaking to everyone, you're really clear on what their lead times are, and then you're communicating it back to the retailers. Sometimes things get tight on deadlines, so we'll be saying, like, to the retailers, drop dead date is is Friday, and then it often goes beyond there, and we'll have to, build in a bit of lead time, and sometimes not enough, and we'll have to be on the phone saying like, can you squeeze something onto the printing press tomorrow for the labels or whatever, and have to really, it will be tight sometimes, but you do everything you can to prepare. And then with manufacturing, you sometimes will you might hold a day's production slot that you haven't completely confirmed and sent in the purchase order for, but you've got some time allocated. But they will, a few weeks out, they'll be screaming at you saying, look, I'm going to have to give your slot away if you if you don't have your order in soon. So it is a balancing act, but you generally work with the retailers.
Have there been some harsh lessons along the way in that regard? Has there been some missteps early on?
Oh, millions. I don't even know where to start. We've made every mistake you can possibly make, I think. But yeah, we've definitely overproduced, underproduced. Communication is the main thing. So in the retailers, there's lots of different teams. So you have kind of like the buyer, who's your primary interface, but then you have the demand planning team. So you'll be speaking to them as well and making sure that, the buyer lists the products, get everything in the system. But then when it comes to actually ordering it, they then hand them on. So you want to also be speaking in parallel to the people looking after demand and making sure that, you're really clear on what they're going to order and like what the forecast is. So what do we, work collaboratively? What do we think we're going to sell over the next 8-12 weeks? If you're out by, 25% or something like that, and often you can be out by more than that because you really don't know. You're benchmarking off your existing range, what's in the market. We've had products launched and be benchmarked off Heinz before. So sometimes things are just like in defaults in the system. So when we launched a product into Tesco, it was just set up on the Heinz rate of sale, which is in another stratosphere. So we were had hundreds of thousands of pounds of orders being triggered that we couldn't fulfill, and we shouldn't fulfill really, because you don't want to load a huge amount of stock into the supply chain that will then sit there and go out of date. So you have all sorts of challenges like that and that shouldn't be happening. And it's a simple kind of conversation with them saying, like, what's your demand there? Why is it, saying we need millions of pounds worth of stock? We probably don't. And then you can fix these things, but you're dealing with big retailers and things like that might get missed because, we're still a small part of an enormous business. But as you get bigger, you get more experience, you build better relationships, you figure out who you need to speak to and make sure you're sort of man marking all the key people, and that happens less.
Okay, great. Then I suppose I was going to say the last thing, there's lots more to discuss about the business, but the last thing big area that you haven't really talked about is the brand. You talked about the brand had to be right. Given you were coming to this as a CEO without a background in brand, how did you go about that? What was you had a great, fantastic product, but how did you go about building a brand around that?
Yeah, so none of us had real sort of brand experience. We all knew brands that we liked, and we were closely tracking brands that we thought were doing a good job. I think one of the first things we did was we got a branding agency to help us build out the packaging, because I think one of the things we realized very early on is we're tiny and we have to control the things we can control. And one of the things that we can is when people walk down that aisle, they will see our product, and therefore let's make it as strong as possible. So let's make it stand out and use every inch of packaging to make the most of it, because that is, we're on a level playing field there. Heinz have a ketchup there, we have a ketchup there. Let's do the best we can. So we got an agency in to do what we think is quite a nice job of the design.
Yes, looks fantastic.
We use the exclamation mark, which is kind of like stop and think about the sugar, think about health, all that kind of stuff. That's a kind of subtle message. And then we use the kind of the exclamation mark point is different on every product so there's a lot of subtle things that you don't have to necessarily recognize. But then, we've done loads of A/B testing on all the different, what we say on the front of the pack, the shelf ready packs, the boxes that they go in. We have messaging on there, show our kind of great taste awards that we have, because we know people are, flavor's the biggest driver of purchase. So we need to have that and also balance the health. So I think a lot of work on packaging, and we brought in experts to help us with that, because that was not our area of expertise. And then, beyond that, focused hugely on point of purchase, because that's in the early days. You need to make sure that, we know that our product is going to be in Tesco. Let's focus on getting it right there. So that's packaging, promotions. So giving people like an intro offer, a trial offer, some money off to try it, with the view that hopefully they pick it up, try it, like it, and then we'll go and buy it at full price later, which we see they do. So huge focus on point of purchase. And then alongside that, two other things we do are sampling. So we know we have a good product.
Yeah.
We definitely do now. In the early days, it was hard work to get there, but we know that people like our product now. So, and when they try it, they want to buy it again and they love it. So that's our biggest weapon, really. So get that into as many hands as you can. So we sample the hell out of it, really. So we try and get our product into, into the hands of the right customer. So that's partnerships with other brands, some of these kind of sample box kits that get sent to your house, all sorts of sampling activity, working with brands that are doing food that goes with condiments, working with restaurants or brunch places, putting the products on the table, because that's almost free trial for a consumer. So all of that kind of stuff. And then social media has been key. So we knew we wanted to build a community of people that love it. We saw pretty early on that people really engage with our social media content. We try and keep it really raw, and that's one of the areas that we can differentiate versus big brands, because big guys, it's a hired CEO who's not founder, maybe isn't, well, definitely isn't as passionate as a founder is of their own business. So we just try and do lots of raw face to camera, honest content, and that really goes down well.
And that has been hugely successful.
Yeah.
So just dwelling on that, obviously, you understand being quite modest, but it is innovative. And I think to a lot of business owners who've maybe had to learn social media halfway through their careers, looking at kind of challenger brands that use it looks really natural that you just take to it. Was there a lot of planning and thought went into that, or was a lot of it quite natural and you do it because you're consumers of this stuff as well, so you understand what your market wants?
Yeah, a bit of both. I mean, the other thing is it's broadly free as well. So, absolutely, you can do some advertising and all that sort of stuff, but social media is, particularly with TikTok, Instagram Reels, that kind of thing, you can make them and you can put them out there and you can reach quite a lot of people without having to spend any money. And sampling is, most of the time, just the cost of your product, which is not free, but it's a lot cheaper than a lot of activity out there. So, do as much of that as you can. With the content stuff, I'm not a natural social media person. I don't really, I use Twitter, X, that kind of thing, but very much like reading things rather. I'm not kind of one of those people that I don't spend a lot of time on Instagram naturally or TikTok or that kind of stuff. I do now because it's part of what we do, but I didn't grow up with spending much time on social media, so it doesn't come naturally to me. But we realized it was a huge opportunity for us, and then we started making some kind of more refined stuff. So we've had photography shoots to really showcase our products with food, which I think is important, but a lot of the raw stuff we've just tested and learned, figured out things that have worked, had a couple of kind of lucky breaks with videos that have gone viral, and then just built upon that. But a lot of it is just being consistent and showing up and just doing it, not a whole lot of thought beforehand other than test, learn, try this angle works, let's do 10 more videos like that and see what happens. But people just love seeing the journey. That's the main thing. They love seeing behind the scenes what it's actually like. I think people's perception of what it's like to run a business run a startup are very different to actual realities. It's like probably think you spend all your time recording podcasts like this, but actually you're on the train working solidly all the way there, a bit late because didn't quite finish, and sitting Costa in the station for 20 minutes, sending emails,
dodgy Wi-Fi.
Exactly. Like that's the reality of it. You're just running around working every minute.
So and I think it's because it's such a relatable product that everybody's grown up with a version of these products on the dining room table, but with, I think, speaking personally, imagining that the process of designing, making, branding, getting it into grocers, etc., the complexity of all that seems insurmountable. So I can imagine people are fascinated that you managed to do that and do it successfully, and three people not coming from that space either.
People love that. And one of the things that we do a lot of is store visits. So we go into store and I do it on my personal TikTok, actually, not the brand, although they're completely interlinked, but people like seeing stuff from a person rather than the brand. So I do a lot of it and it's all Dr. Will's focus, but going down the store and talking about, here's what we see on the shelf. Our products are at eyeline, which is great, but we're not in the box. So we lose that opportunity for a bit of extra branding.
What's the box?
So you have when products are on shelf, so you have your products are on the shelf there. Sometimes they're just on the shelf and they're taken out of the box. We have a box that kind of, when you deliver them to a retailer, they come in a case of 6. So you have 6 ketchups, 2 at the front, 2 behind. And they come in a box that the top just rips off, and it has messaging along the front there. So as a brand, and we have lots of debates on TikTok because some people think the shelves look messy when there's all these boxes there. But as a brand, you want your product in the box because it will say like, Dr. Will's all natural condiments, great taste producer on the front there, and we'll have all this extra messaging, which just gives us another opportunity to stand out. And we try.
Going back to what you said about marketing, that was one of the things that you guys very specifically opted to do and to use it as an opportunity to inform consumers and create more awareness. So if it's not in the box, that's it's money wasted.
Yeah, exactly. And little things like, how many facings do you have, which is how many wide you are on the shelf.
Okay.
So if you have just our ketchup in a Waitrose store, for example, and there's only one unit there, it's pretty hard to see. But if you have two next to each other, it makes a big difference. Twice as much stand out. And if it's in the box as well, you get a bit more. So those things make a difference. In some stores where we do really well, you might have 4 facings where it's kind of two boxes wide, and that makes a big difference. So we talk about all these things, explain to consumers like how this works, what we're looking at, location on the shelf, and all that kind of stuff. And there's lots of details that go behind it. People love learning about it because I think a lot of people, obviously everybody shops in retail, but probably don't give too much of a second thought to how this all comes about.
Yeah. And with the social media and content, and I see you have had several things go viral with huge numbers. You can tell us what those numbers were, but can you draw a line between that and spikes in sales?
You can, but it's not as straightforward as you think it would be. So I think, again, if you go back to the kind of like, if you have a direct-to-consumer business, I'm not saying that you will always see a huge spike when you have some activity, but you can more clearly draw parallels, and you can often see where the consumers come from. So you can see they clicked on a link from a social media video and attribute it. Harder to do that with retail, but absolutely we've seen spikes in sales, and we've seen spikes in interest as well. So if you look at like Google searches on Dr. Will's after we've had viral TikTok videos, they've spiked, and you can see sometimes a bit of a delay as well. So you can see a spike in interest, and then maybe a couple of weeks later you see a bit of a sales uptick. One of the challenges is that nothing's in isolation. So you might have, we talked about this a little bit before, but you might have good weather, like a fantastic uptick in weather, which helps condiment sales a little bit. You might have another brand coming off a promotion, or you going on to a promotion, which helps. So there's other things, but generally we can see it's not always instant, but definitely what we have seen is doing more social media, having more viral videos, and generally having more of a presence. We're pretty certain from the data we have is driving us, and it drives over a long period of time. Like this kind of brand awareness stuff, the marketing that isn't just stuff that is right by point of purchase, doesn't convert straight away, but you definitely see long term you need to be doing it because it's what builds brand value, and over time you'll see the sales.
Fantastic. So, and then you were kind enough to share beforehand that this year has been a particularly good year so far as well. You feel like the business has moved into another gear again.
Definitely. Yeah, we had a great start to the year. I mean, January and the start of the year is normally pretty good for us because we're a healthy brand, and lots of people are doing sort of like healthy January in some respect, whether it's dry January, veganuary, or generally kind of healthy eating. So that helps us. But yeah, I think last year we spent a lot of time upgrading everything behind the scenes that the consumer can now see. So we did a little bit of work on our packaging. We did a refresh. So one of the challenges we used tons of bold colors. We used to have a different background color for every product. And one thing that we saw is in retail, our ketchup is here, barbecue sauce is here, the mayonnaise is over there. And a consumer couldn't easily tell that the same brand was doing the mayonnaise as the ketchup. So we've conformed that, tidied things up, I think grown up a bit in terms of our packaging. So we did that. That's helped, made some changes with the kind of the jar shapes and got deeper lids and things like that. They're just really small things, but they add to the sort of the premium feel that we want our products to have. So we've had that. We've improved our process of manufacturing to just consistently get great quality. So making sure that every product tastes fantastic. We have really, really high standards, I think higher than probably anyone else in condiments around like how our products should taste, and we're doing tasting panels and checking everything. So we've done loads and loads of work behind the scenes. I think we're seeing the fruits of that come through alongside kind of tailwinds around health and a slightly better market. So those things are really coming together. And then the next thing is, as you start to sell more, winning more distribution. So as your products are doing a really good job, trying to get them into more stores, launching more products, keeping yourself focused, but at the same time finding those gaps and broadening the range within condiments. Yeah.
And you touched on this very briefly earlier, that growing a product business is one of the challenges is the understanding the quantity that you've got to manufacture and trying to look ahead and get that balance right. And obviously that presents funding challenges. So do you mind me asking how you've dealt with that, how the business has been funded to date?
Yeah, so we're angel investor funded. So we don't have any institutional investors in the business. Everything is angel investors, kind of private family offices, that kind of thing. So yeah, we've done a number of small to larger funding rounds, and it's all been kind of private angel investors who've backed us on this journey.
Okay, and do you see that as being funding structures that can take you to the next stage of growth, or is a bigger funding round in the offing at some stage?
Yeah, so we will do a slightly larger funding round in the coming months. Our focus is beyond that, getting to profitability. So we've raised a bit of money over the last kind of 5-6 years, and our aim now is becoming a profitable, sustainable business. So it looks like we'll probably do one more funding round, and then after that, operate as a profitable business. Then it may make sense that you do a growth round at that stage, like a Series B, Series C kind of thing, where it's like, okay, we're profitable, but let's throw some rocket fuel on this because we have a few things that are doing a great job and we just need, more marketing firepower, for example. But yeah, generally profitability is a big focus for us because we want to have a business that, is sustainable for the long term.
Yeah, indeed.
That's something just in terms of just going back a little bit to sort of the competitiveness within the category.
Yeah.
You've got a very specific proposition, and there are other challenger brands in different categories that are very much health food orientated in the way that they've grown.
Yeah.
Do you see any changing behaviour or changing recipes, ingredient usage from the established players in the category? And I guess that then becomes a mix of a compliment to the people who are causing some disruption, but then also maybe a little bit of a threat that if the established brand names start to rejig their recipes, then that maybe enhances their opportunity to retain consumer loyalty?
Yeah, great question. So 2 pieces of insight on that. So the first one is, quite early on in the journey, Hellmann's launched a honey ketchup, and I saw the advert on TV, and I was like, oh god, we're done for. We've barely got started, and they're going to crash us.
Presumably they credited you with the idea, though.
Yeah, it said Hellmann's. Yeah, thanks, Dr. Wills, for the idea. And naively at the time, I thought this is a disaster. We've got this product, and Hellmann's are going to do a version of it. Actually, the reality is that came and went within about a year, because I think there's a few things around that. So firstly, we're building a brand. So we're building, Dr. Wills as a proposition, make great tasting condiments that are better for you. And what we want is a consumer to pick up our product and know that no matter which product it is, whether it's ketchup or a mayo product, it's going to be made with great natural ingredients, and it's not going to be loaded with sugar. There's a challenge in that, I think with that launch with Hellmann's, it kind of, how did it fit into the portfolio? It was also quite early. It's probably pre these kind of health trends, and you go through their products, and some are healthy, some are not healthy, and it's quite hard to work it out. And the brand isn't credible around health. That's not their focus. So that kind of came and went, and that was the first lesson. But the second point around kind of existing brands doing better, yes, we're seeing it, and it's good to see, because I think overall, I'm not hugely interested in just trading share between brands. I think what we want to do is we absolutely do want to take some share out of the big brands, but growing the category is also equally important. If we can grow the overall category for better quality food, that's better for everyone, and it's going to mean that we'll do well, and probably a whole bunch of other brands will do well, some of which might be the big brands. I think specifically, if you look at Heinz, they launched pasta sauces a couple of years ago, and credit to them, great range. I actually haven't tried the product themselves, but have a look at the ingredients. I look at it and think that's along the lines of the kind of ingredients we would use if we were doing that kind of range. And I think obviously they've launched it in 2020 something, rather than back when they launched Heinz ketchup years and years ago. But their challenge is they can't change primary Heinz ketchup. Yes, they can launch low sugar and all that kind of stuff, but people are addicted to it, and it's the thing that they've had for years and years and years. And
subconsciously.
Yeah. But imagine the uproar if Heinz ketchup changed. If Heinz ketchup became something different, like people would lose their minds. Same way with Coca-Cola. So they have challenges there, but credit where credit's due. They've done a great job on that pasta sauce range, and that's the kind of thing that they should be launching. But I think the value for us isn't in one particular product or recipe, it's in building a brand around healthy condiments.
And consumers becoming more and more health conscious,
Completely.
which those big brands can help drive that. Yeah.
Exactly. And we want to make it easy for a consumer, whereby we have broadly every area. You probably won't have every single subcategory, but you have everything pretty much covered, so that they can pick up, they pick up a product of ours, and we can, I think 54% of consumers cross-shop condiments. So they're buying ketchup, mayonnaise, barbecue, hot. So we want to have something that works for everyone in each of those areas, because it's a huge opportunity to kind of cover that whole repertoire.
Good. So delving into you now, and away from the business. So I mean, we've already touched on the formative period. That was a huge decision to leave. I mean, it's a massive departure in terms of career from being an investment banker. And I don't think so it comes as a shock to anyone. That is a road to a very comfortable existence with a nice salary. And it's a huge decision to leave that behind and jump into a startup venture like this. You've already touched on why you did that and why you felt confident to make that decision. Looking back now over 7 years, the development of skills that you've had over that period, which ones do you think have come naturally? And where do you think it's been the biggest challenge that if you were talking to somebody who was thinking about making a similar decision, you'd say that this element's really tough?
So I think investment banking was great in terms of building a broad skill set. And I think the biggest thing you need as a founder, CEO type of a small business is you just have to be somewhat a jack of all trades. That said, you're always going to be stronger in certain areas, but investment banking or consulting or any of these kind of big business areas help you because you're able to project manage. You're able to, do 4 or 5 things at once, manage difficult people, and you can also do some analysis, you can present things, and you also hopefully have some of the soft skills as well, communication, teamwork, like all of those kind of things. So it gives you a really good base. So I think a lot of those kind of things came quite naturally. Things that were hard were brand and product and those kind of things that were completely different. Like I did consumer investment banking, so I was in this space, but I wasn't close to, what makes a product fantastic, what makes a product, what makes people love a brand, like all of this kind of stuff. That kind of marketing area was not natural for me. So one of the first things we did was bring in people who are better than you. And that's something that I think is so important. And people talk about, bring in someone who's 1% better than you, bring in someone who's 100% better than you. Like at the start, I'm still not fantastic, but I was a terrible marketer. So let's bring in a rock star. And then you see a huge difference. But I think you have to be a jack of all trades. You have to try stuff, but be accepting of the areas where you're weaker and fill those gaps as quick as you can. Easier said than done because you have finite budgets, but there's ways around that. Freelancers, beg, borrow, steal, get some advice from someone. That's been really important to cover up those kind of deficient areas, but definitely the brand stuff has been the area where we've needed to upskill. All the kind of the operational finance stuff has been doable because it's a similar skill set. It's analysis and it's, more, not straightforward is the wrong word, but it's a bit more measurable, whereas the brand stuff is a little bit more intangible and harder to get on top of.
I'm an accountant by background, and I recall when you are first signing off on marketing budgets and making marketing decisions and there isn't a tangible return that can be measured, that can be a fairly difficult adjustment to make, to believe that it's making brand impact and building brand loyalty even if you can't see it immediately.
And I'm sure you probably find things like some of the more technical things probably come more naturally to you as an accountant. So I imagine other like technical areas of the business, whether it's like figuring out cadence of meetings that you need to have or managing people, probably comes a little bit more, it's a bit more kind of formulaic and probably works with the accountant's mindset or the banker's mindset versus
marketing is this dark art.
So I'm going to have to stop grinning at this point and say all the sort of live data and dashboards and things that we have are entirely down to David. We literally would not have them if I was in charge.
So that's it. And that's why it's great. Founder partnership's important, right? Because you have different areas that you can cover.
So I've got weaknesses in certain areas, or I've got blind spots. I'm going to build in some rock stars, to use your language, to fill them. Again, bringing in those rock stars is another area that was new to you. What are your learnings in that regard about recruiting people, particularly where it's at a, you can't afford to just go out and pay top dollar for the best people on the market. The risk profile for you and Simon and I have lived through this, when you're in early phases, the risk profile of getting one wrong is pretty costly. It's all hard to absorb. So how did you approach that? What lessons did you learn? Did you get the majority right?
Right and wrong, I think. So we've had some things that haven't worked out. Generally, we've got them right, I'd say. I think we have a fairly good eye for getting in people that are a good kind of cultural fit. And we've done a reasonable job of interviewing to find the right people. I think you can't spend loads of money on team at the start. You want to, and I think that's one of the gripes I have with like the UK market. UK fundraising market, particularly for consumer and not tech, is tricky, and you have to raise small rounds and several of them. Whereas if you look at the US, people are raising a lot more money off concept, which maybe is maybe is too aggressive, but you can raise bigger rounds earlier, which does mean you can bring in a team. Whereas you have this challenge in the UK where you have to very much you really do have to operate on a shoestring in the early days. I think get creative is what I'd say. So look at freelancers. So, okay, if you need senior marketing experience, there's a bit of a sweet spot of people I find where people who have the experience, so maybe they have 4 or 5 years experience, they've really seen some things. So they maybe, I like the caliber of person that's done a couple of years at Procter & Gamble or someone, or Unilever, somewhere like that. They've learned rigor, like how to do things properly, but then they've also worked for a smaller business and they've seen how to kind of rip things up, do things a bit differently, and they've got kind of both sides. And maybe you can't afford that person off the bat, but can you get them in for a day a week as a freelancer, find someone of that kind of caliber, get them in, get things moving. They can sort of figure out, okay, you need an agency for this, and maybe that, maybe you can have that person on a day a week, and then you can bring in a really smart, hardworking grad underneath them who can work. So we definitely did this kind of hybrid thing, and that meant that we could get quite a long way before we got to the point where we could make more sort of senior internal hires, but we still have a kind of hybrid thing where we have some fantastic consultants with loads of experience who we work with. But I would say bringing in key internal senior hires has been a game changer. And we have, the Sophie and Lucy, who I'm sure won't mind me saying are 10 times better at what they do, their areas, than I am, and having them oversee kind of, one on sales and marketing, the other on operations and product, has made a huge difference because they're driving those areas forward, rather than like when you do have an outsourced team and you have consultants, they'll do a great job for you, but when they're freelancers, there's a bit of a limitation because they're not, they might not be in the business long enough to be able to really drive things forward, but it really does get you from, point A to point B. And then you hope at point B, you're in a place where you can, hire someone internal. But I think just team is key. Like I would say the overriding piece of advice is get the best people you can for the budgets that you have, and you'll rarely regret, you have to get it right. But if you get the right people, you'll rarely regret kind of stretching yourself a little bit to bring in somebody who's a game changer, but just, do everything in your power to get it right. If you get it wrong, then realize you got it wrong quickly and make a change. It's like hire slow, fire fast, I think is completely right.
Yeah.
And thinking about the people that have come into the business have been successful, is there anything that sort of at the point of them coming into contact with the brand and the business that sort of is a common theme as to why they wanted to be with you in the first place?
Yeah, I think the people who've done a great job with us have been in this world of food and drink, and they live and breathe it. Okay. I think, and because of that, they've got lots of experience. They've seen lots of different things, which is great. But I think they need to have a passion for it, because I think, there are other areas, if you want to just make as much money as you possibly can as quickly as possible, go and work in finance, or, go and work in tech, go and work in tech sales. You're going to make a lot more money quickly. I think you have to have some inherent passion, because it's a tricky journey, and particularly working for a challenger is tough. Like, you're having to deal with, if you're a salesperson, you have to deal with a lot of rejection, because, in the early days, the retailers aren't going to be biting your arm off for the products. It's going to be, you're going to be biting their ear off. And it's a tricky job to do. Equally with, in operations, you're going to have all sorts of production challenges, factories, and it's a tough job. So I think you have to have a real passion for it. It can be very rewarding, and it's, there's nothing better than working with a product that you really believe in, and it's exciting to go to work. But you have to be, I think you'd really struggle if you just weren't interested in food and drink, if you didn't ever sort of, go to the grocery store and look at what's in products and get excited by products that taste fantastic or are made with great ingredients. And I love looking at grocery stores and seeing what's there and looking at what people are doing to make products healthier, tastier. And I love buying the stuff.
Did you love that before you joined Dr. Wales? Was that a passion for you already?
Yeah, I had a foodie background. So my mum's a food writer. Okay. So I grew up kind of surrounded by food. She was working with lots of chefs. She had a column in the Times called The Food Detective, which was, actually, interestingly, one of the pieces she did was looking at hidden sugars in food. So I kind of, my mum was very happy when I did this rather than investment banking.
Must have made the conversation a little bit easier.
Yeah, exactly. Particularly when I remember a couple of days I was coming home when I lived at my parents' house when I just graduated, and my dad was already up by the time I got back from work, and he was in the shower and stuff. She was thinking, like, this is madness. Like, you can't keep working like this. So she loved that I went into food, but I had this background, and I was lucky to kind of be taken along as a kid to these restaurants and see this kind of foodie world and see these chefs who were pretty nuts at times, but doing really cool things. So I had, and my dad's freelance as well, completely different area, but I kind of grew up with parents doing things a little bit differently, in a school where everyone's parents were doctors and lawyers and accountants and all that, all in traditional fields, which was, a bit different.
Yeah. And you mentioned a bit in your investment banking world, you used the word brutal before.
Yeah.
You haven't used that word about Dr. Wills, understandably, because it's really exciting. But it sounds like it's been tough for the reasons you just said. Do you think that experience in investment banking stood you in good stead for the rejections and the knockbacks and the resilience that you needed?
Definitely. I think resilience is like the number one skill, unfortunately, because it's not, it's not the sexiest thing.
Be nice to need less of it.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, it does for sure, because I think it's one of the hardest things you can do. And then building a business is just as hard, if not harder, probably is harder. So I think it does stand you in good stead. People talk about, you talk about the great things in business, and there's tons of them, but people talk about it being like chewing glass, and I think that is accurate. Like, and it does feel like that at times, where you're, there's good parts, but it is kind of sometimes you're just, particularly with like a product business where you're trying to market on a national scale, taking on other brands, dealing with like working capital challenges of scaling, it is like that. And you're kind of, as a, the founder CEO, you're sort of jumping between the bottleneck areas, the worst parts of the business. So there's, it's I would say it's brutal in a different way, but also fantastic. So I enjoy it a hell of a lot more, but it's equally challenging, probably more challenging, just in a different way.
Okay, interesting. And you mentioned before bringing in experts in the areas that you're not an expert.
Yeah.
But you were in there from day one.
Yeah.
So how did you find the transition for having, and understand there was that step of freelancers in the middle maybe, but then when you did have permanent people driving those areas of the business you mentioned, how did you find that relinquishing of control in those areas? Did that come naturally, easily? Is that something that was challenging?
I just found it very easy, and it's rare to say that because most things are really difficult, but I love having people in who can do a great job, and I find getting out of the way not a problem at all. I think some people really are real control freaks on that kind of thing, and there's certain areas that I'm protective over, but they're better than me, and I'm only going to slow things down by getting in the way. And the areas of the business that I'm involved in probably move the slowest because it requires me to look at things, and I might be on 20 different things at once. So I do a bad job there. Whereas if the team can push things forward and sign them off themselves, then they should. And I'll accept
familiar.
It. Yeah.
Chief bottlenecks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, that is it.
We've got two of them. That's great.
Yeah. So try and get out of the way as much as I can.
Yeah. Okay. And in terms of your leadership style of those people, are you just being authentically yourself and, it comes naturally in behaving as you would? Is it something that you give a lot of conscious thought to, the style and how you motivate and influence people?
Yeah, I think 95% of it is just me being myself, but I do read around kind of how to do things properly. So things like performance reviews, I put a bit of thought in and read around the best ways to do it. And I think those kind of things are important, but generally it's me being myself, and I'm trying to create a culture where people, work hard and really try and drive the business forward, and everybody in the business works really, really hard, but equally I want everyone to enjoy themselves, enjoy the journey. It's important, and
get back home before their dad's getting off work.
Completely, and it's really important they do, because we don't pay like an investment bank, and there's more to life than that. I think as a founder, it's a bit different, and you inevitably are working a lot and doing different things, but I absolutely want a really good culture that people, kind of like a culture where people work hard and really push things forward, but also love it, and don't spend every waking hour in the office. Absolutely get home at a sensible time every day.
On that culture point, just before we sort of started recording, we got into a little bit on the business pursuing B Corp accreditation.
Yeah.
Just talk us through a little bit around the motivations for pursuing that, the experience of going through the process of achieving the accreditation and what it's meant for the business and the culture.
Yeah, definitely. So it's something we always wanted to do. I think I saw a lot of businesses that we looked up to start doing it and thought to me, it's a mark of doing good business, and we wanted to be associated with that. And I think when we set out, we always wanted to, balance like purpose and profit. So always a big part of what we've been doing is let's try and help people to be healthier. by having a better diet. And we want, everyone who chooses a Dr. Will's product is making a choice to choose something that tastes fantastic, absolutely, but also something that's better for them. So that's been a big thing for us. And I think B Corp encapsulates that. It was a long process, probably took us about 18 months to do. And a lot of it requires you to be quite rigorous. And as a small business, there'll be gaps. And we definitely have process gaps and things like that. You have to have, really clear policies in place. And a lot of the stuff we did for our employees, we had some nice policies, but they were informal, they weren't written down. So a lot of it was sort of fixing some of those gaps, which was really good. And then also it's a good, I think we spoke about it, it's good internal exercise to make sure that all your manufacturing and everything is at the standard it needs to be. You have all the policies around kind of anti-slavery and all this kind of stuff, and it's a really good time to sort of check and make sure that you're looking at your whole supply chain and making sure it's where it should be. And in the early days when you're running around like a headless chicken, it gives you an opportunity to take a step back and make sure that you're happy with everything. And then when a consumer sees the B Corp on a product, it's a pretty good sign that the business is doing the best they can on quite a few different areas. So it's kind of around your people, but also community, and every area of the business, really.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm curious just a little bit. You talked about the blending of purpose and profit. If I'm wrong, please correct me. But I imagine in your previous career that actually it was very much more weighted towards the profit rather than the purpose. And then you also talked about the demands of starting a business. I imagine as founders, the business is on your mind most hours of the day and sometimes most hours of the night as well. So it's not like you get to sort of clock off and go home at 5 o'clock and forget about it all. How have you found the sort of increased sense of purpose around this business and what it stands for and what it's trying to do? Does that help with the resilience around all the demands of getting a business off the ground, scaling it, hiring people, and just going through all the challenges that you've described?
Yeah, I think so, because fundamentally, I love doing this, and that's the thing that drives everything. And I think sometimes when you're having a bad time because you're stuck in spreadsheets or you're, just having to deal with a ton of different things at the same time and everybody's on your back for something, you then might have a simple interaction where, I don't know, you open your products at dinner and someone's like, wow, that's the best mayonnaise I've ever tasted. Or that ketchup's fantastic, it's so red, like all the, whatever, those kind of things. And then you kind of remember back to actually what you're doing, or you walk down the supermarket aisle and you see somebody picking up your product and putting it in the basket or something like that. And you see these little interactions and you're like, oh yeah, this is why we do it. And you can sort of lose sight of that sometimes when you're, behind the laptop. So yeah, definitely having something you like, working on something you believe in is very, and I think whenever you're having doubts or it's hard or whatever, and then you see a friend or somebody and they're talking about how miserable their job is and what they're doing, and you think, okay, yeah, this is why I do it, because yes, it's tough, and 20% of every job is probably stuff you don't want to do, boring admin, whatever, but generally enjoy it. Whereas I think in other areas it's very, very different.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, you mentioned reading around subject areas where you've got a bit of a gap maybe. Is there anywhere else you look for your own development? If you got a non-executive, do you have a coach? Do you have a mentor? Anybody you go to for anything like that?
Yeah, so I have an advisor who's actually come on quite recently, but we've been speaking for a bit longer than that. He was actually chief marketing officer, a guy called Peter, chief marketing officer at Pepsi. Okay. So he's got great experience and has seen kind of big brand stuff. So he's been really, really helpful with things like shaping the story, building out the brand. And it's in the early days, but he's really helpful as like a sounding board. And the other person is our finance director is Richard, who's Will's dad, Dr. Will's dad. Okay, right. So I speak to him probably more than he wants to speak to me. I speak to him a lot. I'll be seeing him after this because he's up here in Newcastle, and he's been brilliant because he's on our board. He's our finance director, and he's got experience of scaling businesses. So he was an accountant as well originally, and then became kind of like a COO, CFO kind of character in various different private businesses. So he's seen kind of work with venture-backed businesses, worked at Food and Drink before. So he's seen, just seen lots and lots of different things, and adds a kind of like a skepticism that's really healthy. Like Will often, me and Will and the team will be kind of like, yeah, we're going to get this listing and then we're going to launch these products. It's all going to be great. And he's like, what if that doesn't happen? And actually you need somebody who does that. And you're like, okay, all right, we'll do a more realistic scenario. Yeah. And yeah, if he says he's happy with how things are going, it means things are going really well. So sometimes I get a call from Will and he's like, Dad was actually quite happy with things at the moment. And I'm like, wow, we must be flying. So yeah, it's good to have, I think those people are important. Do you guys have advisors?
We had 2 early investors in the business, seed investors, who both are on our board.
Yeah.
They're both partners in private equity firms, which is our target market. So they give us we're similar in that if they're happy, then you're doing something right.
Yeah.
We're also really lucky. I mean, we get to spend so much time with so many interesting people doing so many interesting things that we often say, like, if we just keep our eyes and ears open when we're out in the world, we get so much wisdom that we can hopefully bring back and turn into something useful here.
That makes complete sense. I think it's that balance, isn't it, between, like, we've always not wanted to get like tangled up in a really, really complicated board structure and then spend more time, with kind of company admin than actually doing, what's important to drive the business forward. But equally, having a couple of people that can, sounding boards and mentors helps. I think it's a lonely journey. I have a business partner, I have 2 business partners and a team, but you're still, as the person who's kind of like spearheading a business, it's still a lonely journey. So getting those people around you who you can have honest conversations with, I think, is really important.
And you want to make sure you're not in an echo chamber and you're getting external perspective. So we have had an executive coach in the past, which is really helpful. Locally, members of the Entrepreneurs Forum, which is helpful. And I'm in a peer-to-peer CEO group where different leaders come together and share issues that they're potentially facing and get the views of others. And it's all really helpful.
Yeah, we've worked with Entrepreneurs Forum up here as well. And they've been helpful. But yeah, I do think networking is really helpful as well. Like, I think that was part of the question, like, where do you learn from? But just the network, like having other founders in the network where you can just kind of, especially when you get past the early stage and you have a really honest relationship with them, it is great. I love having, there's like 5 or 6 people who are doing similar things and you can just be like, market's tough at the moment, all that kind of stuff, and like, lean on each other for help and have honest conversations.
So what's next for Dr. Wills then?
Big question. I think lots of things. So we've got, we want to be in, condiments are an interesting business because you have to sort of play in all the different areas. It's hard to have a condiments business if you only do ketchup or mayonnaise. You want to, most of the time you've got customers buying your ketchup, you want them to have something else. So next product wise is salad dressings. So we have 2 salad dressings that we're about to launch in May. Just in time for salad season, thankfully. So
you're promising us a warm summer for the new salad dressings?
I hope so. I mean, if today's anything to go by, then yes. We've got 2 salad dressings coming out. So we have a Chipotle Ranch, so taking a bit of US flavor inspiration, which we try and do, and then a Green Goddess, which is like a herby light kind of taste. It's oil based, but it tastes almost like a yogurt herby sort of style dressing.
That's nice.
Really, really nice. So a bit different. It's been a bit of a trend on kind of TikTok, Instagram, a bit of a social media trend. So we'll really play into that. So product wise, got the salad dressings coming, and then just continuing to innovate in product. So we've got 1 more launch likely this year, and then we'll just keep building out the range. And then in terms of where we want to get to, we've always said success for us is Dr. Wills being available everywhere where you can find Heinz and Hellmann's and the mainstream condiment brands. So continuing to push ahead on that mission. So we're pretty UK focused. We do a little bit of export, but primarily we're a UK retail business. So we want to be on every shelf out there. So whenever a consumer comes in and they want to buy a great tasting, healthier condiment, they can do it. That's what we want. So that's our kind of, next 2-3 years, that's what we want to do. And so a lot of it is kind of, launching products that are good enough, that sell well enough, that the retailers say, let's put them on thousands of shelves across the country. That's what we're trying to do.
And as you sort of think maybe a little bit longer term, how do you evaluate the opportunities for the brand outside the UK market? I mean, obviously there's lots of expansion opportunity, distribution, new routes to market, whatever it might be. But how do you evaluate Europe, further afield?
Yeah. So we've done bits and pieces. So we've sold our products to quite a few different countries over the years. So we do quite well actually do a little bit in the Middle East. Like in Dubai, UAE, we've had some quite good traction because we buy our dates from there. So they love that the products are made with dates from the region. So we've had some interesting traction in places where we never really would have thought of. But Europe's a great market. We will look at that. We've done bits and pieces here and there, but we're at the stage now with the brand. There's so much growth in the UK that we're prioritizing that, and we're seeing that. But at the same time, we've now got brand awareness such that I think we could do pretty well in other markets. So we look at the data, and then also kind of ease. So things like languages come into play. I mean, one of the things you can do, there's various different routes, but things like you can use Amazon, for example. Amazon's a great way of sort of soft launching in a market, because you suddenly very quickly and without having to sort of build a relationship with a retail buyer, you can have your product on Amazon, for example, .de, Germany, and then everybody in the country can buy your product from there, and they can ship, countrywide. So that's a really nice way to sort of test the market. You can get a bit of market data, see how you compare to local competitors. So we'll start looking at things like that, and then also the retailers. But there's a lot to go after in the UK, and we can, the nice thing about condiments is a huge market. Yeah. So if you're in a small market,
what are our condiment trends like relative to the rest of Europe? Heavy on ketchup, I'm imagining.
It's actually mayonnaise. So mayonnaise is overtaking ketchup. It's bigger market, and I think a lot of the reason for that is flavors work in mayonnaise. So if you look at ketchup, lots of people have tried different flavors. I mean, we've tried beetroot ketchup in the past, but nothing really sells like tomato ketchup. It's very much, whereas if you look at mayonnaise, people love garlic, aiolis, they love sriracha, hot things, mustard mayos, that kind of thing. So mayonnaise is the biggest, which is kind of more in line with Europe, because if you look at Europe, places like France and Belgium, mayonnaise has always been a much bigger deal than ketchup, but ketchup has been bigger in the UK. It's still bigger in the UK than it is in some European markets, but mayonnaise has overtaken. Okay. And then I think things we're seeing are hot sauce just continues to grow. So hot sauce has always been kind of the fastest growing area of the market, just because the hot sauce consumer is kind of, we talk about the consumer being sort of eyes open. So if you're going to buy ketchup, a lot of people are just kind of sleepwalking down the aisle to either grab what they've always bought or grab an own label product, because they're not that fussed. Whereas a hot sauce consumer is like, oh, I love really hot things, or I love piri piri, or I love
the craft beer movement.
Exactly.
Hot sauce guys, yeah.
Exactly. It is the craft beer of sauce. And I don't know if any of you are hot sauce guys, but if you are,
like a hot sauce, yeah.
Yeah. So you might have 4 or 5 in your fridge, whereas ketchup, you probably have 1 in your fridge, right? Yeah. So, and guys who love it, really do have buy lots of different products, and they take pride in cross shopping and trying different things. So that's quite an interesting area to go after, because people just love to try things, and that's a nice consumer behavior to sort of play into. So there's lots of different trends, lots of different options. I think health across all condiments is interesting. Salad dressings will be good fun. I think a lot of people who are health conscious, if you look at things like salad dressings, they don't buy them. They buy olive oil and vinegar, and they make it themselves. Maybe using apple cider vinegar, and they're using a really nice olive oil, because they're kind of like, this stuff, if you look at the ingredients, not fantastic. Don't trust the kind of like a pre-made sort of dressing. Same thing with like something like pasta sauces. If you look down the aisle, there's a lot of stuff that's pretty sweet and sugary, and you think, actually, I'm just going to buy some chopped tomatoes and some fresh herbs, a bit of garlic, and just make something myself. So we're trying to fill that gap where people who are time poor, working all the time, want a quick dinner, can then just go and grab our salad dressings that are, taste really good, interesting flavors. There's a lot of, if you look at the salad dressing aisle, a lot of it is French dressings and Caesar dressings. That's 80% of your aisle. So we're trying to just do something a bit different, a bit more innovative with flavor. So lots of those things, lots to do in condiments.
And going back to the very, very start, Dr. Will's revelation that there was nothing to give some kids to get them to eat their broccoli. How is the kid market responding to Dr. Will's?
Very well, actually. So I think,
I see that as someone with 3 small children myself, so I'm intrigued.
Who are addicted to Dr. Will's now.
They're about to be.
Glad to be. There we go. So it's really interesting. So we see when kids get onto Dr. Will's early on, they love it. And
you do often make it sound like a drug there. They get onto it.
I think where you have challenges are where kids have had loads and grown up having Coca-Cola, loads of crisps and chocolate and that kind of stuff, because they're really, really addicted to sweet things. People often try Dr. Will's even when they're addicted to sweet things and like it. But where we see where the parents have really focused on them trying to eat good quality food, and absolutely they're getting sugars from fruit and vegetables and things, but they're not having chocolate bars all the time and that kind of thing. They tend to love it, and they really like the flavor profile. We've had some really interesting comments from customers. One customer contacted us saying, my kids go absolutely mental if they have Heinz ketchup, but if they have your ketchup, their behavior is a lot better, which is really interesting.
Sold.
So but it's I think particularly And there's we don't have concrete data behind this, to be clear, but I think particularly if you're having if you have ADHD and that kind of stuff, if you're having really sugary products, like you see it with, I'm sure you've seen it with if your kids are given, like Will talks about this when his kids, he's got two young kids, and when they're at school and they get given like chocolate and sugary drinks at lunchtime, they come home and they're a nightmare because they're just kind of loaded up on sugar, running around everywhere, knocking things over, and it's hell. Whereas if they just eat, our product has just natural and lower sugar, they do better. So yeah, we are getting traction there, but we're also a foodie ketchup, so we're kind of targeting adults at the same time.
Yeah, good. So we always like to finish these discussions. That's been absolutely fascinating. Thanks. With our final question is always, if you could tell your younger self, and I think you are comfortably the youngest guest we've had on here,
really?
so you're probably not having to look as far back as some of our other guests. No offense intended.
20 of them.
Yeah. But if you could tell your younger self something that as you were leaving your investment banking job, which something you wish you'd known then, what would that be?
Yeah, I think one thing I would say is, I think people try and give you very binary advice, like be 100% focused, or always do this, always do that. And I think actually the answer is always somewhere in the middle. And, it might be towards one end. So I think like focus, for example, in my opinion, being focused is very important, but you probably need to be 80-90% laser focused, but have your eyes open to not miss a big opportunity, and be willing to take the call with somebody that might lead to something, might lead to a partnership opportunity or something. So I think I would tell myself to think about everything I listen to, but distill it yourself and figure out the right answer and learn from experience. Because I think it's, on podcasts quite often, it's like, do this and don't do that is a lot more clickbaity than kind of an answer somewhere in the middle. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. I think a lot of entrepreneurs are successful because they're so focused and so determined, and they don't always see other options.
Yeah.
And therefore, often to admit that the world's not black or white, it's grey, is perceived as indecision and weakness. And I think sometimes the world is grey.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think focus is massively important, and you do need to be really focused, but you also need to have your eyes open. And there's certain parts of our business or products that we've launched, if we hadn't thought, let's try that, we might have not found a really good growth opportunity. So you do need to have your eyes open at the same time.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much for that. That was absolutely fantastic.
No problem.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Liam.
Thank you for having me.
Oh yeah, I nearly did earlier. Can you settle an office argument for us?
I can.
Should ketchup be stored? You just mentioned earlier in the fridge. Should it be stored in the fridge or in a cupboard?
How is this a debate?
Yeah, it shouldn't be a debate. Isn't it the age-old argument? It should always be in the fridge.
Okay.
That's the right thing. Yeah.
No grey area. That's absolutely correct.
That's the one piece of advice where it's binary. Fridge.